came to this part of. They came from Europe, and they made their homes in towns that had been established on Indigenous lands in what we now call Ontario and Nova Scotia. I continue to learn about the relationships between settlers and Indigenous people, and am profoundly disturbed by the inequities and injustices that the First Peoples on these lands have suffered. Our collective awareness is growing, however, and action to address these wrongs must follow. I am hopeful for that, and in that spirit, acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat, and we thank these nations for their care and stewardship. We are what we eat. We've all heard that. And so it's fortunate that we are able to make choices every day to have a positive effect on our health, as well as the health of other species and the environment. This evening, our speaker will be sharing some compelling information that helped him make a dramatic change in his personal dietary choices. During the webinar, you will be muted. You can ask questions to the presenter and communicate with the hosts using the Zoom chat window at the bottom of your screen. Tonight's presentation will be about 40 minutes, and after that, Jude will read your questions and there will be lots of time for our guests to respond. We are recording this session, and you will be able to find a link to that recording probably within the next few days on the 350 website to watch again or to share. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Henry Swoboda. Henry Swoboda is a board-certified emergency physician, medical toxicologist, and addiction specialist employed by the Kingston Health Sciences Centre and the Ontario Poison Centre, and is an assistant professor at Queen's University. He is a member of 350 Kingston, the Canadian Coalition of Green Healthcare, the Ontario Medical Association Green is Health Group, where he is the lead for emergency medicine and addiction medicine, as well as the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment main group and agriculture and food subgroup. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you. Here, let me share my screen. All right. So yeah, I'm here to talk with you guys about the health benefits of a plant-rich diet. Thank you for that introduction. In addition to all the things that you said, I'm also a father to two growing girls, 4 and 8 years old, that I'm trying to feed healthful food and instill a healthful lifestyle. And I'm also somebody who as recently as 2-3 years ago could count amongst my hobbies sausage making and barbecuing, smoking meats. And since then, I've adopted a primarily plant-based, lifestyle, lost 50 pounds, come off my blood pressure medicines, come off my reflux medication. And so I'm happy to share, some of what I've learned over that time with you. I want to say thanks to Sharmeta. He's another emergency doc who runs plantbaseddata.org. He had the original versions of some of these slides that I've modified. I also want to thank Dr. Shireen and Zara Kassam, who run Plant Based Canada. They wrote the textbook on this issue, as well as a great book geared toward the lay public called Eating Plant-Based that can answer a lot of your additional questions if you're interested. I want to start off with the point that a single billionaire has 1 million times the greenhouse gas emissions of the average person. And so certainly systemic change is necessary, and it should hopefully help to allay some of our climate guilt for our own emissions, but also the recognition that in order to achieve that systemic change, you're right, we need to start at the individual level and grow to the community level, and then actually change society to achieve those greater changes. And so I do think that diet and other lifestyle things can help bring about those changes that will manifest throughout the rest of the world. The great thing about the dietary changes is that in addition to being great for the environment, it's great for you. And so we know that a plant-rich diet is associated with lower rates of all-cause mortality, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, dementia, GI issues, and more. And so we'll touch on many of those things today. One of the pathways that we can go about to achieve this healthful and sustainable diet might be following the Canada's Food Guide. It's actually an excellent example of a healthful diet that we can follow. And one of its triumphs is that it managed to get industry out of the forming of the food guide. And with that, they've removed much of the recommendations for dairy and have certainly de-emphasized animal protein. And so I want to just walk you through the guidelines from this, because this is just great guidance. You can talk with your physicians about it if you're lucky enough to have one, and you can read about through the food guide yourself as well. So the food guide recommends that you eat plenty of vegetables, fruits, whole grain foods, and protein foods. And they recommend that you choose protein foods that come from plants more often. And so where might you get your protein? From beans, lentils, soy. That includes tofu, tempeh, and edamame. You can get it from all sorts of nuts and seeds and whole grains. So there's plenty of plant-based ways to get your protein. You want to choose foods with healthy fats instead of saturated fats. So meat and dairy is loaded with saturated fat. Any solid fat, palm oil, coconut oil has saturated fats in it. So you're looking towards liquid fats. You want to limit highly processed foods. Looking around the periphery here, again, we're going with having plenty of vegetables and fruits, eating those protein foods. You want to make water your drink of choice. And you want to choose whole grain foods, right? So we're talking wheat bread instead of white bread, wheat pasta instead of white pasta, brown rice instead of white rice. And you want to eat a variety of healthy foods every day. So get that variety of less processed foods into your diet. This you can see the similarity between that plate that I just showed you and this one, which is from the Eat Lancet diet, which is a diet that's geared towards achieving planetary health diets. So both healthy for people and specifically for the planet, for the growing population expected to be nearly 10 billion in 2050. And again, you can see the recommendations are very much the same. And so the idea that the Canada Food Guide is a planetary health diet too, I think is totally appropriate. And so to see how we match up, you can see this graph of our consumption of animal products in Canada and the United States compared to the Eat Lancet ideal. And so Eat Lancet doesn't cut out all, and neither does the recommendation for plant-based diets, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But plant-based, typically, when we're talking about the benefits we see in studies, is that you're getting 85% of your calories or more from plants. And so you can see we get far more than that. We're eating far more than the recommended for dairy, as well as all sorts of meats compared to the Eat Lancet diet in this graph. India is much closer, very little meat, more dairy, but they can sustain their nearly 1.5 billion people on that diet. And Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa, can sustain their population of over 200 million people with very little animal product inputs. And so it's something that we can certainly make some changes for ourselves. Just briefly, I want to talk about why it matters for the planet. We had a whole talk on this that I think will be posted online at some point, but the point is that about 25 to 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions on this planet come from the food and agriculture system. And so making changes to it are important. And so about 15% of those total emissions, more that come from transport altogether, come from animal-based foods. And so if you can get rid of those or majorly reduce them, we'll make a major difference in our greenhouse gas emissions. I want to make one other point on this slide. If you look at the tiny print at the top, transport for the food supplies is only 6% of the total greenhouse gas emissions for food. And so it really is more important for the planet what you eat than where it comes from. There's other benefits to local foods, food security, supporting local economies, etc. But if we're talking about greenhouse gases, transport is less important than what you eat. And so phasing out or phasing down animal products in our diet can stabilize our greenhouse gas levels for 30 years and offset 68% of CO2 emissions this century, according to modeling studies. And we can see almost half the benefits from just cutting out beef, over 70% of the benefits from cutting out beef and dairy, and 90% of the benefits from elimination of all ruminants, so cows, goats, sheep, etc. And by getting rid of that 90% of greenhouse gas emissions from ruminants, that will eliminate a large amount of methane, which is a short-lived greenhouse gas, And that's why it can make a difference soon. It can make a difference this century. It can really put a pause button and help us turn things around. But that 90% benefit accounts for only 19% of the world's protein, and it'll be easy to replace that with plant-based protein. So if you get one takeaway, or amongst many I hope you'll get, is that I see beef and dairy as kind of public enemy number one. It's kind of coal and tobacco rolled into one. It's bad for the planet and it's bad for you. And so that's one major change that you can make to help turn things around. You may have heard or read about something called regenerative ranching or regenerative grazing. The idea that by allowing cattle to graze, they can sequester carbon into the soil. It's basically been debunked. It has land use problems. It is only a temporary fix, and then the carbon gets released. You can read more about it in this New Republic article. But either way, if you disagree with me on that point, you can focus on reducing your intake to be more in line with this planetary health diet that we're seeing, this Eat Lancet diet. So reduce the dairy and all those meat products and just go in line with that Canada Food Guide diet that we know is healthy, is all that we need to ask. So, many people might say, well, humans are really meant to eat meat, but are humans meant to eat meat? We think of this dichotomy. You're either a carnivore, an herbivore, or you're somewhere in the middle, or you're an omnivore. There's another classification called frugivore, which we'll talk about, but you can see, looking at these pictures, comparative anatomy has its own problems, but I think this is illustrative of how we aren't really meant to eat meat. And so you can see a lion's giant canine teeth for tearing meat. Bears still have those large canines, but are developing molars that allow them to be omnivores and eat plants and berries and such. Horses have no canines, just have the broad teeth for crushing plants. Chimpanzees have some canine teeth there, but are primarily have more molars meant for grinding up plants. And we know from observations of chimpanzees' diets in the wild that they're an animal that thrives mostly on raw fruits or succulent fruit-like produce of plants, such as roots, shoots, nuts, and seeds. So plants, fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds. That's what a chimpanzee gets the vast majority of their calories from. And so moving on further, you look at the picture of the human and our pathetic little tiny canines that you can barely even point out. And you can see, based on our teeth structure, we are not meant to eat meat. We are at best meant to have a similar diet. We are evolved to have a similar diet to the chimpanzee. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds as the most healthy things that we're evolved to eat. Further data show that prehistoric humans ate something like 100 grams of fiber per day. And we know that today only 7% of North Americans get the recommended 25 to 38 grams of fiber per day. And so we are far off with how much meat and processed foods and dairy that we're eating to meeting that diet that we were evolved to eat. We also know that the majority of humans on this planet are lactose intolerant. That 70% of people on this planet do not have persistent lactase to digest milk into adulthood. And only 5 or 10,000 years ago did the persistence of lactase evolve after humans had already developed agriculture. So humans are evolved to have a completely different diet throughout our history. And the last point is that there are truly no nutrients in animal foods that cannot be obtained from plants. I put a little asterisk there because with B12 comes from microbes in the soil, and with our cleanliness and cleaning our vegetables and things very well, it's probably best for us to be taking a B12 supplement if we are getting the majority of our calories from plants. That B12, just as most people aren't also getting enough sunlight and should be taking a vitamin D supplement as well. So there's some things that we're not able to get from our natural environment and diet, and so B12 might be the one thing. A lot of people have questions about where can you get protein in a plant-rich diet. And so these are some illustrative examples. You do not have to get all of your complete protein with all of the amino acids you need in one meal. You don't have to get them in one day. You can eat them throughout the week, and that's where this variety of foods comes in. But this can tell you how easy it is to get a complete protein. So quinoa or other ancient grains like amaranth can get you a complete protein. Just eating soybeans, so edamame or tofu, is a complete protein. Hemp seeds or chia seeds are great on salads or in smoothies, and it'll get you a complete protein. You mix a rice, a grain, a whole grain, and a bean or a lentil, you've got a complete protein. Lots of classic dishes include those things. You take, again, a whole wheat grain and another bean, a hummus with chickpeas. You mix that together, you have a complete protein. Or it's as easy as a nut or seed or peanut butter sandwich on whole wheat bread. It's easy to get all the protein that you need from a plant-rich diet. You might worry, okay, if I'm going to be eating 100 grams or even that 25 grams of fiber that are recommended throughout the day, am I going to start having digestive issues? And we know that dietary fiber is associated with improved digestive health. And so it can improve digestive issues over time, improving heartburn, nausea, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, and abdominal discomfort. The American Gut Project recommends that we eat 30 different plants per week. And that variety can improve the health of our microbiome, the group of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live within our body and help us with our digestive health. And we know that many intolerances can be attributed to poor digestive health and an unhealthy microbiome. And so if you do have digestive issues, it might not suit you to make these changes all at once. It might worsen your symptoms, but your gut can be trained. Your microbiome can be changed and evolved. And you can kind of gradually introduce those foods. And you can do this. I'd recommend looking up at the library or buying a copy of this book, Fiber Fueled by Will Bulsiewicz. He's a board-certified gastroenterologist who uses this information with his patients to treat gastrointestinal diseases by increasing the amount of fiber in their diet and improving their digestive health. And so he can walk you through some ways how to do it. What about processed foods? Processed foods, again, in the Canada Food Guide, is something that we're trying to limit. What do we think of as processed foods? So processed meats include sausages, lunch meats, bacon, chips and crisps are processed. A lot of vegan meats, all the vegan meats really are processed meats. And so while it's better for you than animal meats, they can still be packed with fat and not particularly healthful. White flour, white rice, sugar, oils are truly a processed form coming from plants and olives and things. Fruit juices are processed forms of fruit, right? Alcohol is a processed form of sugar. I kind of think of all meat in this vein as a form of processed food, right? We feed corn and soybeans and grass and these plants to animals, and they process it and turn it into unhealthful sources of meat protein. So avoiding processed foods in general. And again, here's another book I'd recommend. It goes over processed foods. It goes over the benefit of plants for both people and the environment. And so this is something you can kind of read through this book as well. We know, again, that an ultra-processed diet is not healthy, that it's high in saturated fat, high in salt, high in caloric density, low in fiber. Even when we control for those things, they did a study where they took people, they put them in a lab, they prepared their foods for them, and they matched an ultra-processed diet to an unprocessed diet. And they had the same fiber, same fat, same everything. We find that by nature of eating these processed foods, our bodies don't produce the same hormones, the appetite-suppressing hormones that make us full. And people eat more food from an ultra-processed diet, gain more weight, and thus are at higher risk. Even when we're doing our best to control these macronutrients in their diet, they still are having more health problems from eating ultra-processed foods. So they're things we want to avoid, or at least eat in moderation. Processed foods are associated directly with a variety of health conditions as well, in addition to just weight gain. We know that a 10% increase in ultra-processed foods equals a 12% increased cancer risk. We also know that approximately half of Canadian calories come from ultra-processed foods. So if we can move the needle on that, we can really reduce our and our population's cancer risk. Processed meats are a class 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. So any 25 grams, that's less than an ounce increase in processed meat per day equals a 19% increase in colorectal cancer. Possible causes of this include nitrates in the food, nitrites, processing contaminants, cooking byproducts such as heterocyclic amines, endocrine disruptors, leaching from packaging, and other things. And so again, avoiding processed foods is one of the definite recommendations. And it makes the difference between the ideal diet, a healthful plant-based diet, and a less healthy plant-based diet. And so keeping that in mind can help you make some good choices with food. So I'll walk you through a bit here of some of the reasons why plant-rich diets, why are they better? And we'll talk about how they make things better later, but what are the reasons for it? So an animal-rich diet is full of compounds that cause oxidative stress. They cause the things like heme, the nitrates in the food, these advanced glycation products, which are a combination of the proteins and the sugars in the meat, and they cook and they cause these oxidative compounds to form. Whereas a plant-rich diet is full of antioxidants, a wide array of bioflavonoids, carotenoids, and more antioxidants that help kind of protect your body. An animal-rich diet with its low fiber and multiple other compounds is associated clearly with an unhealthy microbiome. It promotes secondary bile acids and increases risk for GI cancers. A fiber-rich, plant-rich diet promotes gut microbial diversity and production of healthy short-chain fatty acids, things like butyrate that help kind of improve the lining of our intestinal lining and can improve our general health and immune health. The animal-rich diet causes increased gut permeability, which as things are translocate, move through the gut walls and around the system, they cause system-wide inflammation in your body. Whereas there's decreased gut permeability and less inflammation in your body by following a plant-rich diet. There's increased trimethylamine oxide associated, and this has been associated with a whole host of medical conditions. It's a byproduct of carnitine and choline, primarily from meat. As it gets digested, it causes these kind of toxic compounds to form in your body. Or even when you're, again, matching things like carnitine and choline, if people are eating a plant-rich diet and they have better digestive health and microbial health in their gut, you get less trimethylamine oxide and less of these unhealthy compounds in your gut. We talked a bit about how processed foods can be high in saturated fat and cholesterol, and so is meat. And it causes accumulation of fat in your blood vessels, in your liver. It causes increased inflammation and causes chronic disease. We're starting to see more and more diseases as being caused by inflammation. Things like heart disease and diabetes have an inflammatory component that's related to this. Whereas a plant-rich diet can facilitate a lower saturated fat and cholesterol diet. Again, you want to minimize these solid fats, the coconut and the palm oils, and any other oils that might be containing saturated fat, and following this more healthy plant-rich diet. So replacing coconut with olive oil would be a helpful choice there. Animal protein also increases the production of growth hormones. Your endogenous, your own made growth hormones and estrogen in your body is increased by the presence of animal protein. And a plant-rich diet is associated with lower levels of these growth hormones. One other big difference between an animal-rich diet and a plant-rich diet is the presence of these persistent organic pollutants. The idea that pollution of a variety of things, heavy metals, dioxins, organochlorines, polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are fire retardants, PCBs, PFAS forever chemicals, microplastics, all these things accumulate in the environment and then are eaten by, say, a plankton that's eaten by a small fish and a bigger fish, and then the bigger fish eats more of that, and finally we eat the large fish that contains all of these pollutants that were in smaller concentrations in the environment. And that's true for land-based protein as well. And so we know that these persistent organic pollutants that bioaccumulate in animals are associated with increased type 2 diabetes, certain cancers, and cardiovascular disease. And so again, there's all these unhealthy chemicals that we see in an animal-rich diet that can cause all sorts of problems with our body. Whereas a plant-rich diet is full of things like polyphenols, like resveratrol. It's found in red wine and various other plants that you may have heard of. And things like carotenoids, beta-carotene, and lycopene from tomatoes, that all these compounds can have cancer-determined cancer-fighting properties and other healthful properties as well. Isoflavones in soy are very healthy. Isothiocyanates like sulforaphane and cruciferous vegetables like broccoli are extremely healthy for your system. Catechins like EGCG in green tea, it's the healthful component of green tea that you may have heard can help with longevity, or it's the healthful component of dark chocolate you might have heard about, or things like catechins. Flavonoids like quercetin found from various fruits, and anthocyanidins from berries are extremely healthful. And there's other kind of health promoting compounds. So when you choose to eat a plant-rich diet, you're choosing with everything you eat to put something healthful in your body, something that is actually health promoting versus something that is, at best neutral, but also can be kind of health destroying with more animal-rich products. I just want to give a quick word on supplements. You're hearing about resveratrol and sulforaphane, and should I just take a pill that has all these things? And to the best data that we have is that whether it's bioavailability or poor digestive health related to it, or whatever it might be, that eating these supplements in kind of a processed pill form does not have the same benefits of getting them from whole foods. And so it sticks in with the same recommendation to avoid processed foods if you can. And so you can get all these things from plants instead of from pills. So we'll get a bit into some studies on the benefits of a plant-rich diet. So I just want to talk about how some of the research is done. It's mostly long-term cohort studies. So they take people who may have a different diet to start with. They do a dietary questionnaire, they do a health questionnaire, and they kind of do those questionnaires over time, and they see what diseases they get, they see what they're eating over time. But they don't randomize people. They don't prepare meals for people for 30 years to see what diseases. Those sorts of tests are impractical. Some studies just say, okay, are you vegetarian or you're not? But we're getting some improvement in methodology. Are you eating a healthy plant-based diet? Are you eating, what are these plant-based diets where you're getting 85% of your calories? Are we seeing the same benefits from them? And we are. And there are some randomized trials to help kind of back up a lot of the things that we're learning from these cohort studies. But the critical question to look at when you're seeing these things is, you may see studies that say, oh, eggs aren't that bad. And you got to say, well, compared to what? And the truth of the matter is that when you're getting 50% of your calories from ultra-processed foods, that eating an extra egg or taking an egg away here or there and either replacing it with ultra-processed foods or 50% ultra-processed foods or not isn't going to make a big difference. But when you look at a study that replaces that egg with a plant-rich form of protein, you'll see a big difference. And so that's where you'll see all this confusing study out there that happens to frequently be funded by industry. So the pro-egg studies are funded by the egg industry. Pro-red meat studies are funded by the red meat industry. And so it very much depends on what are they compared to in the study to help you determine what benefits you'll get from it. And so again, we'll run through kind of all these things or many of them to discuss some of their benefits. But first, I just want to talk how should you follow the diet? What are some goals? What are some guidelines for how you can go about this diet? And it's not a diet and is in like, I'm going to go plant-based for a month or 6 months and, lose 5 pounds or whatever. It's about trying to find a way to make good choices kind of day by day and changing your approach to food. And so I like the general guidance from Michael Pollan, which is eat food, not too much, mostly plants. If you can do that as your diet, you're well on your way. And so just making it kind of a choice by choice basis, saying, okay, I'm going to try and make healthy choices today. How do I decide? Like, there's so much disinformation and difficult nutrition information out there. And I'd say if you were eating more plants and more whole foods or foods that are less processed, you're making good choices. So just, do that. If you're deciding between animal and plant, choose plant. If you're deciding between less processed and more processed, you choose less processed, and you'll be making good food choices there. If you want to be a little more involved, read more into it, you can read the Canada Food Guide, you can follow the Lancet Eat Diet, you can follow this plant-rich diet where we're kind of aiming for that 85%. If you want to really engage in this whole food plant-based diet, you'll really start to see some major improvements on your health. And you'll see there's some intervention studies out there that show that we can reverse diabetes or slow prostate cancer or reverse coronary artery disease. And a lot of those are found, these intervention diets are this low-fat, whole foods, plant-based diet is the best thing, but you don't have to get there right away. And that doesn't even have to be your goal. You can start making good choices, kind of choice by choice. So what benefits do we see? We see a lot in all-cause mortality, right? Our most important outcome, maybe other than quality of life, which is a little more difficult to study. How likely are we to die? So for all-cause mortality, okay, there we go. Here's the studies. There's a couple of studies out there. So one from JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine, from 2020, followed over 400,000 men and women over 16 years. What they found is for every 3% of calories, every 3% of energy from animal protein that was replaced with plant protein, not with their standards diet, whatever other stuff they were eating, but replacing with plant protein, they found a 10% mortality reduction. They're less likely to die by 10% for every 3% of animal protein that was replaced by plant protein. In another study, same journal, JAMA Internal Medicine, 2016, following over 130,000 men and women over 22 years, they found that this, again, same percent, 3% of plant protein equals a 6% lower mortality from poultry and fish, 8% lower mortality from dairy, 12% lower mortality from unprocessed red meat, 19% lower mortality versus eggs, and a 34% lower mortality versus processed red meat. And so that's the hierarchy you have here, right? Is that you can make healthy choices within animal protein as well, right? You can choose to be eating fish and protein, or fish and poultry. Those are healthier choices, certainly compared to processed red meat. But the healthiest thing that'll be health promoting if you eat is kind of switching over to that plant protein in your diet. Cardiovascular disease, that includes coronary disease, ischemic heart disease, includes strokes, peripheral vascular disease, major cause of death, and a major cause of kind of poor quality of life in people. And so we know from meta-analyses where they take all these different studies, the data from all the studies they could find that really apply, and they put all that data together and they create a new study out of it. And so we know from the meta-analysis that we see that vegetarian or vegan diets are associated with a 30% decrease in incidence and mortality of heart disease. So you're 30% less likely to get heart disease and 30% less likely to die from it if you're following a vegetarian versus an animal-rich diet. Having said that, not all diets are created the same. We know that a plant diet, from some studies, there's variability within these studies, but we see that in this study from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, that a plant diet in general in this study reduced heart disease by 8% on average, that an unhealthy plant diet doesn't help, but that this healthy plant diet, again, choosing unprocessed foods, can get us to decrease heart disease by 25%. So if you switch to vegetarian but are eating lots of dairy and processed foods, it's not the same as trying to follow a healthy diet, but you still do see some benefits. And here's one of those intervention studies I was talking about, where Dean Ornish did a lifestyle heart trial. He took 48 patients with coronary artery disease, followed them for 1 year of an intervention, where they did a low-fat vegetarian diet. There weren't too many who were smoking, but they worked with them for smoking cessation. They did some stress management and moderate exercise for these people. And with those lifestyle and diet interventions, they found 82% of those in the intervention group improved. And you can see then this picture, which is maybe not as astounding to you as it to me, where we see that someone who has coronary artery disease, a narrowing in that blood vessel, and that over years of just eating, we're not talking about meds and other things being applied to them. We're talking about changes in their diet are able to reverse the narrowing of the arteries in their hearts. And 82% of them following the intervention improved, whereas 53% worsened in the control group. And what the other important finding that they had was that the closer adherence to diet, to this vegetarian diet, the better they improved, and that was true in both groups. So those that had improvement or didn't worsen in the control group actually were following a better diet, and so diet itself was correlating in whether we can actually turn around and reverse heart disease. And what about diabetes? We need to talk about carbs, and so refined carbs are the problem, right? Sugar, juices, white flour, white rice. These refined carbs are the problem. Unprocessed carbs paired with their fiber, the phytonutrients, antioxidants, vitamins, and healthy unsaturated fats are not the problem for diabetes. We know from a variety of studies that diabetics who eat more legumes, right, peas and beans and lentils, have better glycemic control. They have better control of their blood sugar, but they're eating more carbs. They're eating these legumes, which are carb heavy, but with all the other things that are present in them, they get better blood sugar control with them. There's not a single study suggesting that even ingesting whole fruit, sugar-loaded whole fruit is bad for health, even in people with diabetes. Sugar is healthy. The fruits are associated with good amounts of fiber, and they're digested slowly for you. So there's, and we know that the American Academy of Lifestyle Medicine, again, talking about how do we intervene even when someone has a disease, they recommend a plant-based diet to people if we're trying to get them to come off of their diabetes medications. The American Academy of Lifestyle recommendation is to follow this plant-based diet. A little data behind some of that is that they followed about 500,000 Chinese adults, got 30,000 plus diabetics, and found out how much fruit they were eating every day over 7 years. And amongst people with diabetes or who developed diabetes during the study, they found that higher fruit, eating more fruit, higher carbs, more fruit, was associated with 17% lower all-cause mortality, 17% less likely to die over those 7 years, 28% lower microvascular complications. That's like neuropathy, problems with your eyes, and 13% lower macrovascular, strokes, heart attacks, kidney failure, 13% lower macrovascular complications. And so we see this, there's similar results in a variety of cohort and other randomized data looking at healthy vegetarian diets, is that eating legumes and eating fruit, both things high in carbs, are good for people with diabetes. And similarly, again, this is one of those meta-analyses where they bring all these studies together, looking at over 307,000 healthy subjects. They found that the closer you adhere to a plant-based eating index, you are 23% less likely to develop diabetes, and that the higher quality of your diet, the even less likely you are to get diabetes. So just by switching to this plant-based diet, you're less likely to get diabetes. What about cancer? Cancer, we know from the International Journal of Epidemiology that each 50-gram increase in red meat increases the risk for colorectal cancer by 20%, breast cancer by 13%, and prostate cancer by 14%. And again, poultry is also associated with cancer to a lesser degree than red meat, but it's still associated. So that the poultry, fish can be a better choice. Plant protein can be the best choice for you. Same journal, 2018, found that women with the lowest milk intake had a 50% less likely chance to get breast cancer compared to women with the highest milk intake. And so dairy, very much associated with breast cancer, as well as prostate cancer. So the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition 2015 found that vegan men were 35% less likely to get prostate cancer. And then again, in these numerous reviews, we find that switching dairy milk for soy milk can improve, can decrease your risk of getting prostate cancer. And so dairy is associated with prostate cancer in all these reviews, or in many reviews. Another one of those intervention studies by Dean Ornish. So very much the same kind of intervention, low-fat, plant-based diet, exercise, stress management, and group support versus usual care over 2 years for people who had early-stage prostate cancer. So this is a type of prostate cancer where you can make a decision. The oncologist doesn't tell you what to do. You decide, well, your cancer may or may not be aggressive. You might want to just have surgery and chemotherapy and not worry about it again. Or we can do watchful waiting and keep an eye on it and see what happens. And so this was all people who chose to just do the watchful waiting. They took half the people and said, let's do this intervention with diet and lifestyle, and took other people and said, okay, we're just going to do whatever the urologist and oncologist were normally doing and see what happens. And they found that control patients, the people who didn't follow the diets, were 5 times more likely to need things like chemotherapy and surgery. So about 1 in every 4 of the people who didn't make changes needed those treatments, were 1 in 20 or so of the people who made those changes. So it can arrest the progression of things like early stage cancer by following these healthy diets. And so what are the general recommendations for cancer prevention? It's the same thing we're seeing in all the things. The same thing I'm recommending everywhere is fiber, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, legumes, soy, and nuts. Those are things that can help with cancer prevention, to kind of distill it down a bit. What about dementia? We won't run through studies too much, but the World Health Organization recommends for risk reduction of cognitive decline in dementia, the same thing, right? Fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and whole grains. They recommend you eat 400 grams of fruits and vegetables daily to ward off dementia. They say consume less than 10% of your total energy from sugar, low amounts of energy from fat, and low amounts of salt. Whereas if you're eating less processed food and eating fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, and whole grains, you're going to hit those sugars and saturated fats and salt targets without a problem. So focus on the things that you can eat that are healthy in your body. Kidney disease, in this article from the American Journal of Kidney Diseases, noted that for patients following plant-based diets can reduce the occurrence and progression of kidney disease. It can mitigate the complications of kidney disease, right? People worry, is there potassium in my potatoes, or or in my bananas. And there is, but if you're eating it with these kind of complex carbs that can delay its release into your system, people are not seeing high rates of high potassium that you worry about in kidney disease. So it's mitigating the complications of kidney disease, and you're reducing the mortality in kidney disease by following these plant-rich and plant-based diets. We're getting more and more data on other things like fatty liver for sure is part of like the metabolic syndrome, including diabetes, and it is improved by a plant-rich diet. Kidney stones, low salt, plant-rich diet, you're less likely to have kidney stones. We're getting increasing data on things like period cramps and menopausal symptoms, arthritis and autoimmune conditions, right? These are some of these inflammatory conditions that can be improved by a plant-based or plant-rich diet. And so what should you eat? Let's talk again just a little bit. What should I eat? We've talked about some data. Again, let's distill it down for the things. I say, let's focus on the things that you want to eat, the things that are health promoting. I want you to eat more plants. Choose plants. You want to eat more whole foods, right? Foods that are less processed. Certainly less processed meat, less red meat and dairy, and fewer eggs, right? So if you're focusing on what not to eat, look at that bottom part. But if you're just trying to eat more plants, eating your regular diet, but you're eating more plants and more whole foods, you're making a healthy change for sure for your diet. If you want to do more, be a little more involved, again, you can follow this Canada Food Guide. It's excellent and will guide you in the right direction on how to do some of those things. I like to think of it too as in what are the 5 plant-based food groups, right? We're not talking dairy, meat, etc. What are the plant-based food groups? Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. And so if you're eating the rainbow, you're eating all this huge variety of these things, you're eating them, throughout the week, you're eating different foods, flavorful foods that can end up with an interesting and varied diet. You're following that American Gut Project recommendation to eat 30 different plants per week. By eating all these different things. Those can be your goals. But if you're trying to put together a meal, say, how can I add from a couple of different food groups? How do I eat this balanced plant-rich diet? And you'll be meeting your nutritional needs through that if you're following this diet for sure as well. If you want maybe some more information on how to go about, you want to get a little bit more involved, you could certainly start. There's a series of articles coming out in the Kingstonist. The first one's out already, and advice on starting your plant-based journey in October is Plantiful. So, if you Google Kingstonist Plantiful, that'll come up on the top of your searches, and you can read through that one. I think there'll be another article coming out Thursday. There's these plant-rich eating virtual groups put on by the Hamilton Family Health Team. You don't have to be a member of that health team. It's open to everyone. And so you can email them. You can Google Hamilton Family Health Team. You could Google, if you Google Hamilton and plant-rich, Hamilton plant-rich, it'll probably come up at the top of your search, and you can look for their virtual groups, 2 90-minute sessions to walk you through, again, a lot of the benefits, but how do you do it practically? How do you meet your protein needs? How do you save on food costs? How do you reduce your food waste, reduce carbon emissions, all that stuff? And you can meet with a dietitian in these virtual groups to help you do that. And so at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have, and yeah, we can take it from there.
Thank you, Henry. My goodness, those are some wonderful resources too. Thanks very much for sharing those. You've certainly given us a lot to think about, and I'm inspired by your personal journey, and really looking forward to traveling further along the road myself to a more plant-based diet. Now our participants have a chance to ask questions of their own. Just put them in the chat if you haven't done that already. And to start things off, I'll ask the first one. Henry, how would you advise people who are trying to offer the most beneficial plant-based foods to their families when faced with choices between organically grown and locally grown foods? I know you spoke a little bit about the transport issues around foods produced at a distance, but if you were faced with those two choices, how would you handle that?
Yeah, I think, I think that locally grown foods are excellent, and they do cut down on those transportation, which, is a small amount, but every small amount matters. They have other benefits, like I talked about, with kind of local food security. For growing the food we eat near to us, we know that it'll be available to us. It'll support our local economies. Can make us kind of part of more in touch with the land and nature around us. And so I think that those are an excellent choice. And I think that organic food is an excellent choice as well. There's some data out there that show that in particular, eating organic foods can be associated with a decreased risk of lymphomas and some like postmenopausal breast cancers. So there's definitely data on some decreased risks, health risks with both of those things. I guess I'd say that I would choose the foods that fit your budget and allow you to eat that variety of foods. I think that those are the two most important factors, are eating those variety of healthy foods. If you're eating a variety of healthy foods, then if you can get local organic, yeah, and you can afford it, and you can eat a variety, that would be the ideal. But I think your priorities can be eating again a healthy, varied diet, and can choose from amongst what's available to you that way.
Okay, great, thank you. Jude, there probably are some questions in the chat. Can you take it from here, please?
Sure, will do. Well, actually, can I ask one question first? My question for Henry is those large studies that you showed with hundreds of thousands of people and 20 or more years were absolutely staggering results. And I'm just wondering, what do the people that recommend keto and paleo diets, have they responded to those results?
I'm not totally sure, what their response is to those things. I mean, I think that people see, my take on those diets is that, again, we have some data on them that breaking them down into what are their components, particularly for things like keto, that includes a huge amount of intake from fats, is that it does negatively affect people's lipids, right? Your cholesterol and things. We know that can be bad for your heart disease. And so they followed people on those diets and seen that despite being able to sometimes get into ketosis, that they're not seeing necessarily metabolic benefits from them. But I think, in my mind, what people gain from those diets is that, again, if we're getting 50% of our calories from these ultra processed foods, you do something to shake up your diet that's like simple. You say, okay, we're going to follow these guidelines for a paleo diet. And paleo is less processed, right? So that's good for you. And so I think they may kind of focus on those benefits. They see, look at how less processed this is and how this is good for us. But if you can give people a clear set of guidelines and shake up their ultra processed diet, they're gonna see weight loss. And we know that from studies too, that people do have, that people can see short-term weight loss for sure, when they're kind of following these diets. And so that's why I try and focus on our simple guidelines here. Again, a variety of plants, eat more plants and more whole foods. And if you're following those guidelines with your food choices, you'll be better off.
So are there large studies showing that paleo is good long-term, or are those results just for plant-based diets or more plant-based?
To my knowledge, there are not large studies, of the caliber. Again, that's amongst the things, I was talking about how the methodology of these studies are improving, is to say, okay, how do we tease out like these different parts of the diets? Okay, you're pescatarian, you're primarily plant-based, but you're also eating fish. And how do you tease that out? And what's the difference between vegetarian and vegan even? It can be difficult to tease out in a lot of these studies. And so, to my knowledge, there's not anything specifically looking at paleo. But again, there's healthful components to a paleo diet that may benefit certain people. And so, I think that people can see benefits by following some of those principles.
Well, thank you. I have a question here from Clark. What about bone density? I'm hesitant to give up dairy. I've heard bad things about veganism and bone density in older people.
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. What I would say is I'd still recommend, as we would recommend for you anyway, if you're looking into bone density, is a vitamin D, supplement. And then, people worry about where they might get their calcium from in a plant-rich diet. Soy milk is fortified with calcium. A lot of the other plant milks are fortified with calcium as well. And so you can certainly make that a healthful replacement. By replacing, you'll still get your calcium, but less of the risks of cardiovascular disease and cancer and those things. There's calcium set tofu that has calcium in it. Nuts and seeds have a lot of calcium in it. And some leafy greens, all leafy greens have it, but the ones that are the best are not so much chard and spinach, which includes something called oxalates, which can bind to your calcium, but other leafy greens, lettuces, and then again, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, kale, cabbage, can have a fair amount of calcium. So you can definitely meet your calcium requirements by eating that diet. If you're unable to, you can certainly take a calcium supplement, take a couple of Tums or calcium carbonate each day. And you may be concerned about some of the studies out there, that you're right, that there are studies that do link people who are following vegetarian or vegan diets with some higher risk of fractures and some decrease in bone density. What they typically fail to control for is weight. So weight, the amount of stress that your weight is putting on your bones every day will increase your bone density. And so people are having a healthier weight and improving their outcomes in all these other domains. May have a somewhat lower bone density. They might also have less padding on them for if they were to fall, to cushion a fall and a fracture. So those are the kind of confounding factors that we think about when we see those things. So what I'd say is that, that you're absolutely right to have concerns about bone density, and different demographics might have those particular concerns. You might want to focus on, again, those healthful foods that have calcium that we talked about, or just focus on taking that vitamin D supplement and that calcium supplement every day, and that will get you the nutritional needs that factors that you need to have good bone health.
And I'd encourage anyone who has anything they want to ask Henry to put their questions in the chat. In the meantime, I'll ask one more question. I liked your slide that showed the beef equivalent to tobacco and sorry, I'm blanking out here.
Coal.
Yes, coal. And I thought, do you think that we'll see the same kind of benefits to people's health that we got from reducing our tobacco consumption as we will with switching to mostly plant-based?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think if again, as I said, I feel like if we're part of this group, a community, if we start as individuals, form a community, and this kind of dietary lifestyle becomes more and more common, and we start phasing out more and more beef. It's the same thing I feel like with fossil fuels, right? People aren't seeing, they're not paying for the true cost of the fuel to fill up their car. The cost is the pollution in our airs and our waters and the destruction of our climate. The cost of the beef isn't just the money that you pay for it. It's drug resistant bacteria. It's cancer. It's heart disease. And so, as people start to get more informed and we just start to develop a culture where we're saying, okay, yeah, this thing is unhealthy. We're taxing alcohol and tobacco in part to discourage their use, but also to fund some of the programs that are required to care for their health. And so as we're actually starting to realize those externalities, which they're called now, which is really just part of the costs of it, and people are moving to a healthier diet, I think, which will be necessary, right, to meet our net zero requirements. In order, we need to be cutting those factors from animal agriculture. I think as we're doing that, I expect we'll be seeing health improvements across the board.
A question here from Lori. Do you recommend Dr. Greger's nutritionfacts.org?
I've seen it before. I think it has I can't say that I've evaluated it fully to give it like a complete full recommendation, but from what I've seen on it, I think it's got good recommendations, and it's helpful, so you can search through it and say, what conditions do I have, or what conditions am I worried about, and what things can I eat in order to treat those things. And so I think taken kind of holistically, like, you know, we'll say, let's base our diet off the Canada Food Guide. Let's get some information from nutritionfacts.org. I think that is an excellent plan.
Okay, and yeah, a comment from the chat, Dr. Gregor is the best. So there's no more questions, so we can start to wrap up. I just want to say thank you for all those great references in your talk, and we'll make a summary of them and put them on our website for people to access. And I'll hand it back to you, Mary Jane.
Great. Thank you, Jude. Yes, that's it has been a wonderful evening. Thank you very much, Henry. And thank you to all the participants for their questions as well. We have one more webinar in this Plantiful month of October. This week, it's the Cook Along on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. It'll go from 6 o'clock until probably closer to 7:30. And that's so that you can enjoy the meal that you prepare. It's a Thai coconut curry soup. And if you want to go on the website, you can get the recipe and the ingredients. And you're already registered for that, and you'll receive a reminder and a Zoom link on that morning. Christina of Knifey Spoony Plant-Based Caterers will be hosting the Cook Along. And a few of the ingredients may not be that familiar, but you can find them at any of the Asian food stores on Princess Street. So we're glad you joined us. Thank you so much. And is there anything else we need to say, Jude? Other than good night and happy eating, happy plant-based eating. And thank you again, Henry.